Hi, I'm Percival Everett, and I'm sorry I can't be there with you. I'd like to thank the curators of this festival for inviting me, and I apologize to them for my poor timing. I'd like to apologize for my failure to show up virtually. I'm sure that all of us are tired of screens. I know that I am. But thank you to the directors of the festival for finding a way to include me and letting me participate with all of you and to hear your comments. In 1989, I was invited by the governor of the state of South Carolina to address the state legislature there about the arts. I said yes immediately, but I knew that I would say yes, and I had to say yes because I knew what I had to say, and that was nothing. At that time, the Confederate flag was flown above the State House in that state, and in the chamber where the lawmakers met. After my introduction by the governor, I rose and told the audience there that I could not address them because of the presence of a symbol of exclusion, a historical symbol of exclusion. This is easy enough for me to say, and because I was leaving the next morning. But the cause is taken up by a lot of other braver and people who were present and living in the state of South Carolina. And some years later, the flag was taken down. It was removed from the top of the building and put on the State House grounds. And that sounds good. It sounds like a victory of sorts. But these 40 years later, I guess it is, I realized that I was wrong. That flag should not have come off the State House in South Carolina. That flag belonged there, much in the way a sign at the edge of a minefield belongs there, and I appreciate that sign, one that tells me there is danger, one that tells me who I'm dealing with. The information that the state houses, that state houses the spirit of that flag, that it holds the goals of those who chose to fly it or would choose to fly it, that's important information to have. So when that flag comes down, it should come down because it no longer has that kind of meaning for anyone there who is in any kind of power. About the time I was finishing James, the novel, I stayed up late, as is my custom, and looked up to see, coming onto the television screen, the 1949 film, Africa Screams, starring the comedy team Abbott and Costello. I find them funny. They had a lot of humor that was based on language and misunderstandings of language, and that the film existed, being made in 1949, with its offensive depictions of black people, didn't surprise me and it didn't offend me. I know those things exist. What was offensive, what was amazing and troubling, was that at the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, some programmer, producer, thought it was okay to air this trivial piece of work on television for everyone to see, full of its racist, offensive, and damaging images of black people. And one of the things I grappled with in making James was how to attack the culturally accepted picture of the enslaved human, and in particular, the enslaved human of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In literature and film, the slave of African descent is always depicted as slow, simple-minded, dim-witted, childish, and superstitious. Of course, that was and is untrue. The enslaved people were complex, complicated, feeling people. Some more complicated than others, just like their white oppressors, just like any people. And certainly some were superstitious, just like many other peoples can exhibit superstition and behave accordingly. But they were complex and different from person to person. In a way, I suppose, I was offering that sort of corrective to Twain's depiction of Jim in Huck Finn. But, it wasn't Twain's mission to render Jim in any particular way, and so he did not. What Twain was writing was an adventure story about an adolescent white boy. The importance of the novel, of course, is that this white boy comes to represent an adolescent country, the U.S., moving through its own landscape and addressing that feature of the American experience that would become the most defining, and that is race. In that way, the novel is incredibly valuable. There are some problems with the novel artistically. There's some problems with the novel culturally. Most interesting works of art present some problems. Twain was not equipped to create a fully imagined and rendered, drawn Jim. That became my job. I was tired of slave stories. I wondered what I was supposed to think every time I saw one or read one when I came out of the book or out of the theater. Was I supposed to sit up and say, wow, that really changed the way I think about slavery? Well, no. That wasn't going to change. There was no other way to think about it except the way I have always thought, the way you have always thought, and the way we think about it now is it's wrong. I don't view James as a novel about slavery in much the same way I don't view Jim in Huckleberry Finn as a part of this novel about slavery. Jim there happens to be a man who is enslaved. Likewise, in James, my novel is about a complex human being who is subjected to slavery. Slavery is a condition that he weathers. It is not the defining feature of his being, his life, or his world. It is simply something that has happened to him and he must endure. I write so that it gives me permission to study something. I don't know much, and so when I start working on something, I need to study. Writing this novel was slightly different. I didn't have to read up on hydrology or mathematics or geography. I didn't have to go any place so I could be familiar with it. I'd been to these places, but I could not go back to the early 18th century, mid-18th century, and experience slavery. Of course, I, like any writer, had to use my imagination to render it in ways that I thought were believable and true. I had only to inhabit the world that already existed, that had been created by Twain. But of course, he hadn't built that world for anyone but Huck. The world for James, had to be built. That was my job. And my study, my world opening, actually comes after this novel. Not in my writing it, not in my research leading to my writing it. As I have discovered more about Twain and that world. I've discovered that the song Dixie probably was not written by Daniel Decatur in it, but by the enslaved people who later moved north to live in Ohio. And then I read a book by a woman named Carrie Driscoll, a book that probably would not have crossed my path had I not written James. And it is a book about Twain and his attitudes about Native Americans. It turns out that the generously spirited and enlightened soul of Twain was not so when it came to his regard for the first Americans. The title of the book is Mark Twain Among the Indians and Other Indigenous Peoples. And through texts of Twain, we are confronted with his intense hatred for Native Americans. Later in his life, there might have been some sympathy for first Americans because of his travels to Australia and New Zealand, where in a removed setting, he was able to witness the same sort of treatment by people other than himself toward people other than Native Americans. But I don't mean to say this to diminish my image or anyone's image of Twain at all, but to call into question my own readiness to accept someone because of a positive response to me. It makes me question my own capacity for racist and sexist behavior. Yes, I've been enculturated in this in much the same way that Twain was. I benefit from 140 years of so-called progress within my culture and society, but these things still exist. I still wake up to see images of Africa Screams with Abbott and Costello and wide-eyed, stereotypic black people. Finally, I make novels. That's all I do. I'm no sage. I am a bad source for political, cultural, or historical wisdom. I am a novelist. The power of stories is that they allow the reader to create the world she or he needs to make. I supply the raw material, the reader supplies the meaning. Supplies the meaning that is going to allow the reader to make sense of this human experiment, because we're pretty young in the scheme of things. I feel lucky, I feel fortunate to be able to participate in this ongoing discussion that is art. Human art, world art. Art makes us better. It does this by exposing the world to us, by undressing us in front of each other, by forcing us to address that which embarrasses us. And I'll close with Twain's words. The human being is the only animal that blushes, or has any reason to. Thank you for having me, and again, I apologize for not being there in person. Cheers.
Hello, Percival. Thank you very much for that presentation. Can you hear us? It's a pleasure for us to meet you, if not quite in person. Can you hear us, Percival? I'm not sure he can.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Those of you who have questions for him, please line up at the microphone over here right away so we can get our Q&A going with him if he can hear us. Can you hear us, Percival?
Can you hear us, Percival? Hello? Let's try him again.
It looks.
I can see you
Alicia,
trying to call me.
is the mute button on, Alicia?
We're working. We can hear him now.
Can you hear us, Percival? Oh dear.
Hold on one
Are we on mute?
We are mute on this. Oh, we have that taken care of. He can hear. Try calling us.
Percival, can you hear us now? Not really. It doesn't look like it. What?
There you go.
There we go. Can you hear me?
I'm not muted.
Okay. We're going to hear. Hold on. Can you try calling my cell phone since this
Sure.
is going to you? This is why we're getting crafty.
Percival, can you hear us now? Oh dear. We may or may not have a Q&A.
Are we connected?
We can hear you, but apparently you can't hear us, which fell
It
on
went
deaf
straight
ears.
to your voicemail.
Oh, because I put Do Not Disturb on because I didn't want my kids. Try now.
Can you hear us now?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All righty. We got it. So we have our first question. Go ahead.
Hi, Percival. Hi, Percival. I wanted to know what you thought of the movie American Fiction as a make of your book Erasure, and in particular the difference in the endings.
I actually like the film very much. There are obviously some big differences between the film and the novel. Come here. But I like the script. I like the spirit of the film, and even though the ending is very different, I think it's quite good. The exciting part for me is not seeing my work represented on screen, but realizing that the story has found another life. Cord Jefferson, the screenwriter and director, took my work and made it his. And so it's not so much a representation of my novel Erasure as it is another work of art. And I'm glad to have been involved with making that.
Oh my God, this is amazing. I loved James, every single word of it. The pencil. Can you share anything about how you came with the pencil and the theft, and then the boy died, I believe, over the pencil? But he just, I don't know, as a writer, as a would-be writer, and as you writing that, at what point in the writing did it come to you that that was that was the symbol of everything for his freedom to write?
Oh, well, symbols find their way into the work. That was organic. It just happened. My feeling is anytime I think I'm onto something that might have some symbolic meaning, I abandon it. So that just happened to be there, and it's the right thing for the story, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, nice to meet you virtually. I'm sure everybody here has read James, but I have a question about I Am Not Sidney Poitier, which is, if you haven't read it, it is so wacky and hilarious and wonderful, and I'm just wondering where the inspiration came for that book.
I don't know where these books come from. And I also suffer from what we in my house called work amnesia. I don't remember working on them at all. I'm very lucky if I remember any scenes from the works. Often people ask me about scenes, and I just stare at them dumbfounded, like a deer caught in the headlights. And finally, I'll recall it. I wish I had a good answer that might satisfy you. It just came to me one day.
That's okay. I hope there's another one like it one day. Thank you.
Hi, wonderful to meet you. Thank you for being here. I have a question. Just your thoughts on Kendrick's halftime show as an example of the Super Bowl halftime show as an example of art as a form of resistance.
I'm sorry, could you speak up just a little?
Yeah, I think this is a little high for me. There, here we go. I'm short. My question is, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share about Kendrick Lamar's halftime Super Bowl show as an example of resistance in a mainstream arena? Any thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I apologize, but this being LA, a helicopter went over right at the end of your question.
That's perfect. I came here from LA, so I totally get it. I'll repeat the question. All of us in America who care about football, I'm not one of them, but I'm forced to watch it by my boyfriend, experienced Kendrick Lamar's halftime Super Bowl show, which was sort of embedded with a lot of symbols of resistance. And I was just wondering, inspired by your speech earlier about art and how we can use it as a form of resistance and communication in times like these.
Well, that's a great question. And I'm just a writer. I hope to be an artist. Art is almost necessarily political. No work is without its politics because it's made by someone who has a politics. It fits into the world somehow. If the work attempts to erase all of that, then that says something about the artist, of course. These are bad times for us. Any work of art that makes or challenges an audience to think more than it does is needed, is important. We have people who would do away with education, who desire an uneducated and unthinking populace. So it's up to those of us who can make art to make it. To turn to an artist for any kind of political message is a bad idea. But the art itself can do a lot of work.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. One more.
Lucky me. Hi, Percival. I wondered, was it always James for you? Did you consider other characters whose stories needed to be told? And since you've written, have you thought about or heard about other characters whose stories also need to be told?
The idea of James came to me, and I hadn't had a thought of doing this with any other characters. And the more I thought about Huck Finn, the more it calcified in my thinking that this was the thing to do. This is not the sort of novel I usually write, and I doubt I will look for another character to inhabit in this way. But there probably are many characters whose voices ought to be heard in a different way. It's really not what I'm about. I'm happy that this book hit a chord and has gotten a lot of attention, but it's more a fluke than anything.
Thank you so very much for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I know that you were treated to Margaret Atwood, and that's like thinking you're going to see the Monkees and ending up with Led Zeppelin. So I think
Well, thank you so very much. This worked out very well, and we were very happy that you agreed to be with us virtually. So thank you for that, Everett. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'll sign off now.
Quite fabulous. Let's hear it for Alicia, who made that all happen. Alicia is an amazing producer. She just worked miracles this week. We weren't sure how the timing on this program would work out tonight, so we're going to extend it to 8:15. So we give Margaret and Wayne plenty of time, and I'm sure you'll all agree with that. I hope you can all stay with us until 8:15. So we met Wayne Grady earlier this week. I want to remind you, and he's going to introduce and interview Margaret Atwood. Wayne is a Canadian writer and translator. He writes both fiction and nonfiction. He's a translator also, and he's one of Canada's best-known science and nature writers, and has written 14 nonfiction books. He's won 4 Science and Society Awards, and his work has been included on the Globe and Mail's annual list of best books of the year 6 times. He won a Governor General's Award and the John Glasgow Prize for his numerous translations from French. He's a popular guest lecturer and has taught in the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. He spends his winters here in San Miguel. We're trying to persuade them to live down here full time. He lives here in the winters together with his wife, Marilyn Simons, whom you met this afternoon, talking with Deepa. So please, and Wayne will introduce Margaret. Please welcome Wayne Grady.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for all of this, and thank all of you for being here. It's a great pleasure to be back. Marilyn and I are thinking of coming down here full time. Jorge Hernandez this afternoon said that if you learn a Mexican word today, then you can become a Mexican citizen tomorrow. So on the way over here, we were talking to our taxi driver, and we asked him how to say snowstorm in Spanish. And he said, tormentina de nieve. And I think tormentina is a much better word for it than storm. It's a torment to be back in Ontario right now. So we might stay. We say we're not going to stay, but then we stop in front of every real estate office in town and look at the photograph. You all know that, right? Susan missed one item of my biography when she introduced me. It was a great introduction, thank you, but she didn't mention that I am a saint. In Margaret Atwood's novel, The Year of the Flood, I was made a saint. I forget what I'm a saint of. So does Margaret. But I'm going to introduce Margaret. I'm not going to, if you want a long introduction by her memoir, which is coming out in the fall. Meanwhile, I will say that Margaret Atwood was born in the Ottawa General Hospital in 1939, just after the Grey Cup football match, which is Canada's version of the Super Bowl, which we heard about today. And at the age of 6 months, she was backpacked into the Quebec bush by her parents. Her father was an entomologist, an eminent entomologist, and spent a lot of time in the forest. She did not attend a full year of school until she was 12. Every child should hear this. Her first book of poems, Double Persephone, was 16 pages long, hand-set and self-published by Margaret in 1961, in an edition of 220 copies that sold for 50 cents each. It now sells for $4,000 if you are lucky enough to find one. That's 4,000 American. This year, Paper Boat, New and Selected Poems, 1961 to 2023, came out at 544 pages, 548 pages, a lot of pages. She's quite possibly the best known and best loved writer of our age. She has written 40 novels, short stories, and books of essays. You see, there are more than 2 genres in North America. She has written 3 operas. Her novel, The Handmaid's Tale, has been made into a television series that is going into its 6th season and will be followed by its sequel, the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, The Testaments. She has earned almost every literary award on the planet, as well as 27 honorary degrees. And she is a generous and dedicated defender of the natural environment, possibly because of those first 12 years she spent in the bush. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage Margaret Atwood. Live mic? Yes.
Live mic. Is it working? Hooray. All right.
Was that the first time you've ever been compared to Led Zeppelin?
Yes.
Easy questions
yeah,
first.
I've been compared to a lot of other things, but not that.
James Percival Everett's novel takes place in the 1880s when Huck Finn was published.
No, I think it takes place before the 1880s.
Oh, yes.
It's still the days of slavery. We haven't had the Civil War yet.
Right. Oh, that's right, yes.
Yeah,
but it takes place in the past.
In the 1880s, yeah.
Published in the 1880s. But it takes place in the past. And
yes.
you have said that ancient past.
We're getting somewhere.
But you said that books that are set in the past are still contemporary books. They're still books about the time in which they're written.
They cannot help it.
Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Well, once upon a time I was a Victorianist. Mm-hmm. And that 19th century was when they invented the historical novel. Let's say Walter Scott was first on the scene. And he wrote a book called Ivanhoe, which I'm sure you've read.
I have. I've seen the TV series, too.
Lots of people haven't anymore.
I can sing the song that goes with the TV series. I won't.
Oh, please. Yeah, so it's about medieval times, and it's got armor in it and all those things, but it is a Victorian novel because it cannot help but be a Victorian novel. And the values in it are Victorian values. So you really can't help it. Even if you're writing about the past, your approach to it is going to be contemporary with the time that you're writing it, and similarly with Huckleberry Finn, that took place after slavery had been abolished. Looks back, some of it feels sort of nostalgic, to tell you the truth. But it's also clear that Jim is the hero. He's actually the only person with a sense of decency in the book, because that does not include Tom Sawyer. Huck is somewhat decent, but feels guilty for it. So this is Twain later than the setting, but the values in it are the values that he had at the time. They're not 1846 values.
Right. And Huck and James, it tells the same story, but from a different character's point of view.
And from a very different time, namely now.
And knowing all the things that have taken place
knowing
since
all
then
the stuff that has
now.
taken place since then.
But still making the point that not much has changed.
Well, yeah, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
Quite a lot has changed, and quite a lot of other things have not changed.
Yeah. So does it follow if a novel set in the distant past, an historical novel, is really a novel about our times, that similarly a novel set in the future is also a novel
cannot help
but be.
Yes.
So,
because guess what? Don't be startled. We're not in the future yet.
well, some people write as though the future is happening now, right?
Well, but what about the other future that hasn't happened yet? Writing about that.
That's Ursula Le Guin's story. So at least 6 of your novels are set in the future.
6?
I think I counted 6. Are there
That's
more?
That's a lot. I don't think so. I count 4.
Oryx and Crake. The
Year of the Flood. Mad Adam. Okay, 5.
Handmaid's Tale. The Testaments.
Yeah. What's the 6th?
The Heart Goes Last.
Oh yeah. Okay. I thought that was more about the present, but I'll give you that.
You're like Percival. You don't remember what the books that
is actually true. People said, how do you write them? I don't know.
But let's just talk about The Handmaid's Tale then for a minute. That was published in 1985, which means you were writing it in 1984.
I was very cornily. I was, but I couldn't avoid it.
The years following the way they do. But did knowing you were writing in 1984 affect the way you wrote The Handmaid's Tale? Given
it was embarrassing.
Was it?
But yeah, sure. I mean, how could I be so corny as to write a 1984-like novel in 1984? But let's go back in time to say 1951 approx, when I first read 1984. Mm-hmm. And this was the age when it was the early paperback age, and you could buy paperbacks in the drugstore. They always had a rack, and they always had these very cheesy covers on them, like blondes in negligees, cleavage. There was a lot of cleavage. So you would pick up this thing, and I'm sure this happened to a lot of people, that you thought was going to be a dirty book, and find yourself reading War and Peace. I think that probably did wonders for literature in a dreadful sort of way. But my copy of 1984, which I had as an early teen, did have a cheesy cover of that type on it with cleavage. Mm-hmm. But it was fairly thick reading. However, I was very interested in it. And I then became a Victorianist. Mm-hmm. And the Victorian age was the age of utopias. People wrote lots and lots and lots of utopias. They tried to set up real ones. My favorite one is called Fruitland. It involved...
That's a kind of underwear, isn't it?
I think you're thinking of Fruit of the Loom.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Well, this was Fruitland, and it was Louisa May Alcott's father and a bunch of other airheaded transcendentalists who decided they were going to move to the country and grow fruit. And they were going to live off this fruit and think pure and noble thoughts. And they were allowed to eat vegetables too, but only vegetables that grew upwards, because vegetables that grew downwards were too earthy. Okay, so how did that work out? None of them knew how to grow fruit. None of them even knew how to grow vegetables. So I think they stayed in the country until they'd used up everything they had brought with them.
And then went home to Thoreau's mother for dinner.
That's that kind of thing, yes. Anyway, it was the age of all of that, because people really did believe in the 19th century that they could keep on improving things until everything was perfect. So look at the progress they had made already. Sewer systems, choo-choo trains, ballooning, lots of things like that. Mm-hmm. Bicycles, finally, although they were regarded with suspicion at the beginning. There was something that you were supposed to get called bicycle face, which came from pedaling too fast. Your face would get all pulled back.
With the G-forces on your face.
You could
yeah?
sell that. You know, you can make a lot of money selling that. Get bicycle face. A lot cheaper than plastic surgery. So all of these things were going on, and they thought the world could be infinitely improvable. And if you go back and look at illustrations of the year 1900, you'll see lots of people writing about the future, how great it was going to be. That spirit continued to the Chicago's World's Fair and lots of futuristic things again. And that's what Brave New World came out of, but it's a satire. So the tide turns in the early 20th century. And after World War I, it's almost impossible to write a utopia because we had seen European nations just blasting each other to smithereens. And it got even worse after World War II. It just became virtually impossible to write a utopia. But we got lots of dystopias. And the 50s was a golden age for Ray Bradbury. We were all reading Huxley, reading John Wyndham, and we were reading Orwell. So these dystopias were quite an influence on The Handmaid's Tale, partly because I knew the pitfalls. You know, if there's always a story in the dystopias about how things got that way. And that can go on a bit too long. My problem with Handmaid's Tale was that the character in it is not allowed to read, and television is all censored. So she doesn't know how they got there. She's experienced the effects of them getting there, but she doesn't know the behind-the-scenes story, which is why I have an historical notes at the end. So Orwell has an historical note at the end, too. Where did I get the idea? People think that 1984 is very pessimistic, that it ends with Winston Smith loving Big Brother, and you know he's going to be shot pretty soon. But then there's more, and the more is an essay on Newspeak written in standard English in the past tense. And that tells us that the world of 1984 is over. It did not prevail. So I'd wanted to do a story of that kind with a female protagonist, because most of them up till that time had been male protagonists. We had an expression in our household, do it to Julia, which is right out of 1984. So Julia is the sex pod in 1984. So I wanted to flip it and look at what it might feel like to be on the other side of that. And also to include an historical notes in which the world of Handmaid's Tale is over.
And that, I don't want to give away anything from from the Testaments, but that's sort of kind of the
Testaments
structure
takes place 15 years after Handmaid's Tale. And it's my belief, and I do say belief rather than knowledge, that regimes like that collapse from within. You get the generation of true believers, then you get the generation of administrators, and then it starts getting quite corrupt, and things sort of fall in. And we've seen that happen, at least I have, several times during my lifetime to various regimes in different countries in the world. So the Testaments...
The Soviet Union.
Yeah, it was the biggie. But I could name some others. The Argentinian generals, for instance, who were throwing people out of planes. Never mind, we won't go into the Amnesty International notes. So they get too corrupt, they become unsustainable, and they collapse from inside. So I wanted to show the beginning of that happening to Gilead. And yes, there is always a resistance.
You've been writing a lot in your Substacks about the parallels between the French Revolution and contemporary events. Same pattern, though. It took a little longer in the Soviet Union, but in the French Revolution it took 4 years. 4 years.
Yeah, well, it depends whether you're counting to Napoleon and including the Directory. But 4 years, start to finish, till Robespierre's head comes off. Very suddenly, he must have been quite surprised.
They didn't have midterms in those days, I guess.
They didn't have what?
They didn't have midterms in those days.
They didn't have midterms, right. Yes, well, you can, and there is so much literature about the French Revolution, it's just endless. Everybody's got their theories. If you want to read about the 24 hours during which Robespierre, at the beginning of the 24, he's on top of the heap. At the end of it, he's minus a head. It's a book called The Fall of Robespierre, and it goes hour by hour, minute by minute in Paris during that 24 hours. The other surprising thing about the French Revolution is that so many documents have survived. So there's endless sort of gold mines for scholars and theorists. Simon Schama has a huge book about it. People either come out being kind of in favor of it or really not very in favor of it.
Yeah.
Or they come out saying, well, good idea, but the execution left a few things to be desired. So amongst my researches, I went back and saw the 1935 Tale of Two Cities starring Ronald Colman as Sidney Carton and an absolutely crackerjack Madame Defarge, played by an actress called Blanche Yerka. She's the best Madame Defarge that you will ever see.
She's the one who knits under the tumbril, under the
Yeah,
guillotine?
that was a real thing. People
Yeah.
really did that. But yes, that's one of the things she does, but she does a lot more things too. It's my secret theory that Dickens was more in love with her than he was with the golden-haired, very pure, good, truthful, and sweet and fainting heroine.
Right.
Lucy Manette, should you inquire.
One of the things about novels set in the future is that they are predictive. Like they're
Well, sometimes they are,
I mean,
sometimes they aren't.
to some extent, they're not just sort of
Yeah.
wouldn't it be fun if, but they're sort of telling us, they're warning us. I think at least
The
yours are.
dystopian ones are
The
warning us.
yeah,
The
that if-
utopian ones are saying, hey, just try harder and you can be this.
Yeah, but yours are saying if we don't smarten up, this is what's going to happen.
And
And they, well, let's talk about Gilead
your
for a
point
while.
is, yeah.
Sometimes writers get it wrong. I mean, Huxley, there are no feelies now, or in
No,
the
there
movies,
aren't. It would be quite difficult to do that.
Yeah.
Especially if you add smells,
Well,
which I think he wanted to do.
Yeah,
because
smellies.
The smellies. Well,
you know what I'm referring to in Brave New World. Aldous Huxley predicted that the talkies, the movies that were called talkies at the time, eventually they would be feelies, so that there would be some way of sort of passing the feelings of the actors into the audience as well as the sounds of their voices. That never happened. Well, except for good acting.
If you'll remember, what they end up watching at the Feelies is films about whales copulating, because those gives you really big feelings.
I always wondered what that felt like. But so sometimes writers get it wrong or predict things that don't happen, but that hasn't
Very
happened to you, has
frequently.
it?
Well, yes and no. I don't think we're going to get the outfits.
Well, you see them everywhere.
I know.
Everyone's wearing.
I don't think they will be mandated.
Right. Yeah.
But I am about to write a Substack about how it's actually better in Gilead for women of a certain age than it is in Texas and Florida right now. At least they get clothing, food, lodging, and expert medical attention. Yeah?
Whereas?
Whereas.
Yeah.
None of the above.
Yeah.
So in my deepest, darkest thoughts, I think, well, all of this stuff that's going on is just a way of killing poor people. Because capitalism has decided that with so many things automated, they don't need a surplus workforce.
Right.
The way the 19th century did.
Right.
Isn't that a bad thought?
It is.
Yeah.
We don't need it. We don't need a workforce, and
No, you don't need a surplus
we
workforce.
we don't need a middle class either, right? I mean,
Apparently, we don't need that either. So you will notice, as I'm sure you have, that when the latest election happened, these quotes, conversation, started switching to matters of class, away from matters of identity. And people started pointing out, which some old people like me already knew, that rich people around the world had more in common with one another than they did with the people in the lower ranks of the countries they were from. And this is just a reversion to the 19th century world of monarchs. 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th. You intermarried amongst aristocrats and monarchs from other countries rather than commoners from your own country. And that's why Prince Philip was Greek. That's why the Romanovs were all related to Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Georges were German and
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Oh, yes, they were not English. Yes.
And George III, was it George III during the French Revolution who was mad king?
No, that was later. Oh, that was the American Revolution.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Oh, okay.
That was earlier.
I keep getting them mixed up.
I think he continued to be mad, but he didn't have that much influence on the dealings about the French Revolution and the English.
Right.
Yeah.
So Janet Malcolm said at one time that people believe fiction more than they believe nonfiction. When they read nonfiction, they know that that's just one version of the events, and everyone else mentioned in there would have their version, and this is just one of them. But with fiction, there's only one version. It's the one that you're reading. So if people believe fiction more than they believe nonfiction, why do they still come true? Why do dystopias still come true?
Okay.
If people believe it's going to happen, and
No, they don't.
They don't believe it.
No, they know it's fiction.
Yeah.
They're not that stupid.
Oh, okay.
They know it's a novel. And one of the reasons people read novels, one of the reasons is to get out of the reality of every day that they happen to be in, into a different world that they can understand better, because fiction is the closest thing we have amongst the arts to being there doing that, because you are your own screenwriter. You're supplying all the sights, the sounds. My Mr. Darcy isn't the same as your Mr. Darcy unless we've both seen the movie. And they supply the tastes, the memories, the inner thoughts, the feelings, and that's what you're reading when you're reading a novel, which you never actually get in real life. You can't get that close to a person in real life, don't you think? So that's one of the reasons people read fiction, but believing and believing in are two different things. It's the novelist's job to make their world believable so that people believe in it, but that doesn't mean they believe it will happen. So the kind of belief invested in nonfiction is quite different. So if you tell me that Lake Erie is full of lampreys, because Great Lakes or something you know quite a lot about, I'm going to believe that's true, and I won't go swimming in it.
Even if it's not true.
Even if it's not true.
If I put it in my novel, you still won't go swimming in the Great
Well,
Lakes.
I might, because in your novel you might make the Lake Erie quite different.
Yeah.
If you set it in the future, or indeed the past.
So people believe in fiction while they're reading it. It's the willing suspension thing.
They invest themselves in the story, and if the author comes up with a blatant contradiction,
Yeah.
you can lose your invested belief.
And how does that work with futuristic fiction when, you know, two streets that don't meet might meet? And how do you not lose your readership by
what?
Okay,
well, so
by writing
the,
about something that's so unbelievable that you lose your audience?
No, I don't think that's what we're talking about here.
Okay.
I think if you make the streets meet in chapter 20, and then they don't meet in chapter 32, that's when you lose your audience, because they have violated the axioms of their own world.
Yeah, okay.
So you told me that the aliens were blue with green ears, but later on you have them being red with purple ears. What happened? You know, why did you forget? So you knew Graham. He had a friend whose mother wrote romance novels, and she was also an alcoholic. And she used to write the novels behind a folding screen, and she would dictate them to a secretary. So she would be rambling on about the romance going on in her novel, and the secretary would say, "Excuse me, Mrs. So-and-so, page 20, the heroine has blue eyes, and on page 35, you've got her having brown eyes." And the voice would go, "Well, change it." So you know when you're editing your own book, you're looking for inconsistencies, that you got it wrong about your own world.
Right. You had trouble keeping ahead of the science that you were writing about. I remember a story of you were upstairs writing Oryx and Crake, and so you invented gene splicing that would create pink rabbits that glowed in the dark.
No, those had already happened.
Yeah, okay. But that's
I carried it further, but the gene splice had already been done.
Of that particular animal?
Yep.
And rackunks and...
No, those hadn't been done, but who would do such a stupid thing? You never know. Anyway, I have to be careful about my science because my brother is a biologist.
As your father was.
And he reads my books. And if I get something wrong, he's an older brother. He will let me know.
Right.
Now, here's what he said about Oryx and Crake. He's a man of few words. He said, "I think you did pretty well with the sex. But I'm not so sure about the purring."
Right.
But science has since vindicated me.
Yeah?
Yeah, science is telling us. I gave my people the ability to purr as a self-healing method.
And healing others too,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Healing, they purr over them instead of praying over them.
When they're blue.
And so since that time, we have been told by science that if you have a migraine headache, and if you put a purring cat on your head, that will be helpful. They haven't told us how you make it stay. Is that going to be the cat in the hat?
I think you have to gene splice it with a sloth.
Yes, or something, or maybe a fur rug.
In the Testaments, Canada is a place of refuge. It's where people. Am I? Is this a spoiler? Is that okay to?
No. I mean, this is just historically true.
Right.
A lot of.
And it was true during the Vietnam War.
It was true during slavery.
During slavery,
so
I'm a living testament to that.
There you are.
Yeah.
So the place to escape to was Canada because Britain had abolished slavery earlier, and the U.S. used to send slave catchers up to Canada to try to drag people back across the border, and were often quite resisted by the inhabitants. So yes, a place to escape to, on the negative side, Canada and the United States regularly interchanged criminals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you were wanted in Canada, you fled to the States. If you were wanted in the States, you fled to Canada. We could go into smuggling. There's quite a lot of that, too. But the Vietnam War, and it would be just natural for people trying to escape Gilead to take the escape route that I have mapped out for them, which is an old Underground Railroad escape route.
Right.
Bangor, Maine was quite important.
Bangor?
Yes.
Yeah. In the Underground
In
Railroad?
Maine.
Like
Yes, yes. Then you could take a boat and get up to New
yeah.
Brunswick.
Right. Yeah.
It's very covey around there. It's a lot of inlets.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of places to hide.
Yeah. And Mexico is a pretty good place of refuge
Yeah,
too.
if
I
you're-
highly recommend Mexico.
Yes, if you're close enough to it to get there,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
And people in Texas and Florida are close enough. Just saying.
Yeah, right. Certainly.
Oh, are we at that point? Okay. Well, Margaret was going to read a poem or two. Is that
Yes.
from her new
Wayne
book?
made me do it. Yes, I can do it. So this is Wayne's choice. It's called Small Book. We thought it would be appropriate for a writers' conference. And he did point out that this poem called Small Book is on page 544. Yeah. Yes, the longer you live, the longer the books get. Small book. I want this to be a small book, a small, slight book, easy to carry, the sort of book you would tuck in at the last minute to read on a plane. To read on a plane you yourself took out of impulse, a melancholy impulse with rage in it as well. You will take this plane, but you may not take it back. Let them wonder. Let that one person wonder. This would be just, considering all the love you have failed to receive. Meanwhile, you were walking alone under strange palm trees, sneered at by the locals, you and your thin-skinned feet and your peeling nose and rancorous thoughts. And you've forgotten the book in the airplane magazine pocket. I want this to be the kind of book a man might find as he cleans the last airplane you have ever taken. He sees the book and hesitates. Should he throw it out? But no, he can tell. This book was left there just for him. Perhaps it was written just for him. He has despaired of such a thing ever happening, so much so that he's almost given up reading and slumps in a stupor in front of the television instead. But now here is this book, his book, and he snatches at it as if stealing, and hides it under his shirt and takes it home, because this is the sort of book that passes itself from hand to hand, unnoticed by most, like a microbe. The room he takes it to is not a room with books. This is the only one. It sits there now on his kitchen table beside the dried remains of the scrambled eggs he had for breakfast, and he looks at it. He's almost afraid to open it. What will it say? It will say what it has always said, his name, or yours, because by now it's you. It is you reading this message, which is a cry for help, the silent cry you sent out when you got on the plane. This book has you by heart. It knows you backwards, you and your sulky anguish, because you're in it now. You're in this book. It's reading you. You're caught by it. you can't get out.
I think that's a perfect place to go on to questions from the audience.
Let's do that,
Okay.
if there are any. It's all right, I've been asked everything. You're going to try.
Are we ready? Have you been asked about the trad wife phenomenon?
Have I been asked about the what?
It's a phenomenon on social media in the last 10 years. They're called trad wives, and it's a massive thing. It's women with millions of followers.
Oh, trad wives.
Trad wives.
Trad wives.
Sort of the embodiment of what you wrote about, but they're making money out of it by being sort of wholesome, submissive females on the internet. And it seems like it's very divisive. Some people see it as sort of insulting to feminism, and other women see it as empowering because you can stay home, make millions of dollars just by espousing
Yeah, I doubt that
traditional
they're all
values.
making millions, actually, but never mind. Okay, so this is about basically the Phyllis Schlafly model. So you make a career out of telling other women they shouldn't have a career. Old story. Yeah, we go through cycle after cycle of people telling women what they should do. And a lot of those are other women. It was a mistake in second wave feminism to downgrade women who were raising families and accuse them of sleeping with the enemy. A lot of people actually kind of like sleeping with the enemy because that's their preference. Yeah, so it's another cycle as far as I can tell, and I think it coincides with a lot of people getting burnt out at work, and it also coincides with people having to stay home during COVID.
Right.
A lot of baking went on in those years, like really a lot. Yes, so I don't think it's a question of either, this is bad or this is good. It's another part of this endless cycle of people telling women how to be.
Thank you.
Hi, Margaret. Larry Kiekler. I flipped on my email and was looking at my Guardian dispatch, and I thought I saw your face there.
And did you?
Someone introducing a diary of Victoria Amelina, the Ukrainian novelist.
Yes, the Ukrainian, yeah, that's right. I did a piece on it.
Could you tell us something about that?
Okay, so Victoria Amelina was a very good writer and journalist who got blown up in a cafe in the Ukraine. And I've followed that war pretty carefully because I think it's quite crucial to the future distribution of power in the world. And it's very interesting to me that the United States now wishes to hand it over to a country that is invested in destroying them. Russia is not your friend, just letting you know.
Do you have any comment on the diary or the notes that make up the diary because she didn't finish it?
No, but a diary is by its very nature unfinished. No diary is ever finished until the finish.
Margaret, in that piece, you also said that in times of war, it's very difficult to make predictions about the future.
Yes, it is, because you don't know how it's going to turn out. It is, to me, amazing that Ukraine has held out for so long and done so well. And we've also seen a shift in power, so see if you can get your head around this. China owns Russia. Russia owns the States. The States is enemies with China. Figure that one out.
Well, it's all resolved in Greenland.
Well, I think that's going to be a bit harder than they think. And as for Canada being the 51st state, I don't think they've done the math. That would not be the 51st state. That would be the 63rd states, because we're not going to have just one. If you think that Quebec is going to roll over easily to be assimilated with a bunch of Anglophones and turn into Louisiana, you've got another thing coming. So that would mean about 12 more, how many more senators? They get 2 each, right? Okay, so 24 more senators and a whole bunch more houses of representatives. And the Republicans would never get elected again. So, so go for it. We'd be happy to have you join us. You can have a king. You've always wanted one. You've got much more colorful things on your police.
Good health.
Plus horses.
Good health care.
The musical ride. The health care.
Good health care.
Yeah.
Abortion.
Royalty on your stamps. Funny colored money. There's a lot of benefits. Of course, you'd have to have a prime minister instead of a president. The thing about the States is they were the first to really do a modern republic, and they hadn't thought it through. So we divide between the head of state, which is the monarch who does nothing except launch ships, and the head of the government, which is replaceable. Whereas the poor United States is stuck with the president being also the head of state and the Mrs. President having to be the consort. Some of them are just really not into it.
Or not up to it.
Not into it or up to it either. Yeah.
We have another question.
Hi, Margaret. Suleiman from Cascadia, I guess. I mean, I'm in Victoria, BC, which of course is part of California and Oregon and Washington State. That's who we identify
you're
with.
wondering about the great big earthquake that is to come.
Exactly, but I guess we're 60 million people in Cascadia, so we're ready to be the 7th most powerful nation in the world. But I wanted to get
until you fall into the sea.
Until we fall into the sea, exactly.
Yeah.
The two things that strike, I think, all of us in this conference is much of what we experienced here was about the importance of writers making sure that we understand how important it is to be human, to stay close to the human. And Percival touched on it today. And the other thing was hope. You have written so wonderfully with Handmaid's Tale about, in fact, where we are now.
Not quite. Yeah.
Well, not quite. And that's the thing. My question then is, how important do you feel it is for more of us writers to be looking ahead and at least plotting and mapping and looking ahead to anticipate what could happen? Because you've been so wonderful at doing that for us with Handmaid's Tale and others.
So one of the things I will say about writers is you should never, ever tell them what to do. Number one, it won't work. But number two, once you start telling them what to do, you're in the Soviet Union, about 1951. So let them do what they do, and then we can make up our minds about whether we think they've done it well or not, or how important it is, and all that other kind of thing. But once you start being prescriptive to writers, you're in a different political universe, right? So I say, let him rip, and then we'll decide.
I'm a Mexican, so bienvenida. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Thank you so much to be here. I'm such a big fan. I was surprised that somebody had a little backlash about testaments, but I think that it were so openful and to understand these times. And I only want to ask you, when do you think about the Testament? When do you think about to write about the Testaments?
When did I think to write the Testaments? Funny you should ask. So I started the Testaments in 2016, before the election, okay? We were shooting Handmaid's Tale, and I have a cameo in the first season. That is me in the uniform of an aunt whacking Elizabeth Moss over the head. They did add a sound effect, but we did have to shoot it 4 times because apparently I was not whacking her hard enough. So it's extremely surreal to have your leading lady turn around and say, "Hit me harder." No, I might hurt you. Come on, give me a whack. Yeah, so like that. And we were doing a scene with Aunt Lydia, who is played by Ann Dowd very, very well. In The Handmaid's Tale, Aunt Lydia is a pretty distant figure. We don't know what she's thinking or how she got there. So having read a lot of spy stories in my life, and known some resistance fighters, especially from World War II, because I'm really old, and there's always a resistance. It struck me as being very possible that somebody in the power structure of Gilead would turn against it. So that's when I started writing it, and we continued shooting the series, and we went to bed on the night of the election thinking that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and we woke up the next morning finding that she had not, and everybody connected with the show had the same thought. Our thought was, we're in a different show now. Like that. Not because anything changed. The script remained the same, but the frame within which people would view it had changed remarkably. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It wasn't just entertainment. Like that. You are welcome.
Last question.
Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, both of you. I'm a Canadian farmer and homesteader and gardener. And
Where?
Ottawa Valley.
Oh yeah, I know it well.
My first daughter, I think, was born in the same hospital as you.
Same hospital as me, but at a different time.
Yeah, she's 15.
Where in the Ottawa Valley?
Cobden, Pembroke area?
Pembroke,
yeah.
Yes, exactly. We always went through there.
Yeah.
So we went up that highway.
Yeah, beautiful area. Kind of still looks like Hobbiton.
Yeah.
My question is, I was just wondering, you have so much insight into the future, and I wonder what...
I don't really.
Well...
It seems that way, yes, but go on.
What do you... So, I guess, what do you see happening with food in the future, perhaps, if you do have some thought on that?
Oh, there's a huge shift towards organic, partly and a huge shift away from Roundup. And why? Because it gives you cancer and causes the male sperm count to drop remarkably. And never mind what it's doing to frogs and insects. Okay, so people seem to have gotten onto that. The problem for organic produce is that it's usually somewhat more expensive. But the news about highly processed foods and also pesticides, herbicides. I'm the Silent Spring generation. Yeah, my dad was an entomologist. He was very against widespread spraying of forests because not only does it kill the pest you want to eliminate, it kills everything else. So we could go on about this for some time.
No, thank you. I appreciate your
so
insight.
that's what the God's gardeners in Year of the Flood are about. They're growing everything themselves, and I met some real ones. I met some real ones combining religion with environmental activism and organic farming. So that was after I'd written the book, however.
I'll let my daughters know that you passed through their neighborhood.
Yes, indeed.
And that you like organic vegetables, but maybe we'll.
Well, you know, I grew up on them because they hadn't invented this other stuff yet. And because we lived up north with no grocery stores, we were in the woods, but you could actually grow things quite well there if you had a lot of old horse manure, which we were getting from the loggers who were still using horses then. So yeah,
thank you.
I'm a farmer. I should say I'm a gardener.
Thank you so, so much, Wayne and Margaret. This was an incredible treat. We're very grateful. Thank you so much. Well, guess what? We'll see you next year. Now, those of you who have are package holders or bought bundles, we have the closing reception out in this patio on the other side of the dining room. We welcome you to a closing reception. And we'll see you next year. Good night, everybody. Oh, Percival Everett's books are for sale over here in the book signing corner. Good night, everybody. Have fun at the reception.